All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're ready to go. The second panel discussion, I think that we will continue to talk about some of the same issues that we touched upon during the first discussion. Although we have although the title of this panel discussion largely focuses on Latvia's defense industry, we have, in fact, an international panel, so it's not only Latvian. A couple of rules before we proceed, so please take note that you have 10 to 12 minutes for your introductory remarks. And after each panelist has spoken, we will have time for questions from the audience. The time limit is because the second panel is not as privileged as the first one. The first panel discussion was more than 2 hours long. We have only an hour and a half. So please take note of that. And our panelists are, first of all, Mr. Jānis SΑRTS, who is the State Secretary of Ministry of Defense in Latvia. I think he needs no further introduction in this audience. Then our second panelist is Raul KUTT, who is Director of Procurement Department at the Ministry of Defense in Estonia. And he will talk about the experience of Estonia when dealing with cooperation between industry and Ministry of Defense. Then the third speaker will be Ms. Elina EGLE, who is the Chairwoman of the Board at the Federation of Security and Defense Industries of Latvia. And our fourth panelist is Mr. Tālis JUHNA, who is the Associate Professor at Riga Technical University, representing the academic sector. But of course, we will start with Mr. Jānis SARTS. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. It's really a pleasure to see such a big audience here for this afternoon subject. When I looked at the sort of lead-in phrases for this panel, I specifically looked at the question why the defense industry in Latvia has not blossomed as one would have supposed about 10 years ago when we joined NATO alliance. And I think the quick answer is because you get out what you put in. And if for the last 6 to 7 years, our country has been able only to spend about 1% of its GDP for defense, obviously there's not enough money to actually be the basis for the fundamental development of the defense industry. So I think in all of those things, one prerequisite is that there is a stable home market for the national defense industry. Without that, it's very hard, especially from the circumstances as we have here in Latvia, where much of these things have to be developed from rather low baselines. I think it's a very important factor. So, of course, but that doesn't withstand the fact that there have been some successes. And I would probably point to some of those, because on the nature of these successes, we might talk about how we should proceed now in the future once we will get more of the defense spending in this country, unfortunately because of the international environment. But certainly I think that would be a good starting point or a pushing factor for the growth of national defense industry. And there, I think the most obvious example is our soldier defense system, which I think has been very well recognized, not only here in our country, and I'm not speaking only of uniforms, but as I've said, the soldier defense system, which is a complete system to defend a soldier in a modern, both technologically and philosophically environment in the military operations. And it's been acclaimed as one of the best soldier defense systems in the operations where we've taken part, both in Afghanistan as well as in Iraq. But what I think was the basics of the success was actually decision that we would do the integration of different kinds of things and materials that exist in the market for the purpose of the Latvian military. So it's not like you have to recreate everything that there is in the market. You have to actually integrate it in a best possible way and to allow it to be effective for the given specific circumstances of the Latvian armed forces. And as far as I've seen the development of that company, it actually has taken a good advantage of that opportunity and has become actually the player in a regional context in this environment. So there are some success stories. So now let me quickly look at the figures. Our current defense budget is around 250 million euros, slightly more than that. About 20% of that goes to the investment, and by investment I mean both the infrastructure and the equipment. So roughly 50 million euros a year. Much of that is into the I wouldn't say the mundane things, but ammunition, buying in the equipment for the soldiers, and etc. Few pieces of that, or few millions of that, are only spent on something that is really new. But what will happen in the next 3 years, as you might have heard, the government has decided that in 3 years we'll go for 2%. So if 1% is 250 million, then, well, 2% should be around 500 million. Depends, of course, on the economic growth and et cetera, et cetera. But basically our assumption is that if we have this scenario that we would not keep the 20% margin for the investment, we would try to increase considerably the investment margin so from the extra 250, and I'm here of course speculating a bit or theorizing only, we would have around 35% of that would be a new equipment development programs. So if we look from that perspective, there will be quite, for the Latvian size, handsome amount of money available for the industry. Of course, we are looking for the capabilities that are modern, because with a small country, small size of the military, you have to aim at the top-notch technology to be able to actually perform the requirements that state and the current geopolitical circumstances give us. Thus, obviously, if we speak, for instance, for air defense systems, there are no industries here in this country that would be able to just come and give us the product, especially given that we're really looking at a high-end spectrum of the capability. So how can the industry benefit? I think in a number of ways. First way is to become one of the components of providing the capability. For instance, one of the big things for the Ministry of Defense is security of supply. So we might buy something from, I don't know, United States, France, Italy, pick your country. But what is important that in a crisis time, we have it working. We have it working, we have spare parts, we have the knowledge to keep it up, we have the ability to repair, and et cetera, et cetera. I think that is first and foremost the possibility. Second, when we develop the particular systems, I think also, as I pointed to this previous example, integrating different pieces of the equipment, of the capability into one single coordinated, cohesive capability. And here I would say, and our also previous lessons learned are that the IT sector is the one that has good position in actually providing this integration piece of different kinds of the equipment into one singular sort of capability. Also, I think there are some niche capabilities, especially in programming business, where I think Latvian companies are very well positioned. For instance, I'm sure it might have been already mentioned, the Alliance Ground Surveillance project. It's one of the top-end NATO Alliance capability projects where one of our software companies is providing a rather serious piece of the software. So I think there is the competitive edge for our industry where we have to work. But I think also to understand the setup, all of those things that we speak will only be successful in the business and environment in the longer term, where the product that might first be commissioned by the Latvian Ministry of Defense can have a life after we have done our procurement. Like with the soldier defense systems. We were the initial buyer, but since then they've come into the market and offered the kind of goods they've developed for other kinds of customers. So if any kind of industry just concentrates on what Latvia can buy, it would not, I think, be as competitive as we want. And there I would probably jump into what would be our Baltic cooperation, where I think there are a number of prospects for joining in the forces. There's been a lot of talk about joint Baltic procurement, not been that successful so far, but I think there is more prospect in the future, given that all three countries are now saying, well, we'll spend about 2%, so more money. Secondly, more money for something new, modern. And also, I think there is a sense not to compete too much, because if I would say honestly, the defense market in Europe is very, very competitive. So for anybody to get into that market, you should not reproduce that somebody else has already, big production amounts, and it's hard to compete. You have to go into the niches which are new, and I think there, on the tech side, we have some advantages. We should look at this area as the way forward. And the last thing I wanted to touch upon is the wider setup of European defense market. As I said, it's in a bad shape. The spending is not really good, neither on research on development nor on the procurement itself. So it's very competitive. It's hard to get in there. But what I would say is that we have to look for the ways how small and medium enterprises in that market can actually survive and blossom. And therefore, there are some ideas in the European institutions of allowing more European funding for the defense industry, specifically for dual-use capabilities, which I think is something we would be very much sort of looking forward to use. And the last point, I think, which is also a very good possibility, and that's cyber realm. Cyber defense, cyber security realm. There's not much of the products available on the markets. In my view, it's a comparatively uncontested area, and specifically given the developments in this realm, I see that there is the possibility for the products in this market not only being procured by the three Baltic states, but starting from that market to get a sort of startup potential for the wider European market, which I think is very important. For that, I would probably stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. SΑRTS. Thank you for providing the government perspective on on the current situation and on the things to come. And it would be only logical to continue with Estonian perspective. So how things look in Estonia at the moment. So please, Mr. KUTT.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. I noticed that, well, I'm the second Estonian here on the stage, so although Estonians have some of a reputation in Latvia, and at least in your jokes, but happy that you have invited me to here to share what we have done in order to develop our defense industry. Well, government has decided that the Minister of Defense is the one who is dealing with the defense industry, coordinating the development. To the rest of the industries, of course, under the Minister of Economics. By doing that, at least we hope that we can focus more specifically, and perhaps this has been boosted up the development also. Well, first, I just want to express the importance of the Defense Industry Association that the Estonian companies have created. We have about 100 companies there. Probably if you would ask from any big nation, that none of them would be called defense industry. But you know, they are all industry which they have clearly expressed interest in doing something in defense. And so you could call them all dual use. But would be very difficult for the MOD to go separately to each of those small companies. So we actually have found a partner in Defense Industry Association, which helps us a lot. Now from that, and the association was already created in 2009, and then we started cooperation, and in 2013 we developed a defense industry policy for 13 to 22. And in there we tried to kind of quite clearly identify that who are the equal partners in developing defense industry and what are the tasks and responsibilities for each of them. And it wasn't something that MOD did, it was in cooperation with the industry representatives. So we tried to get to a reasonable expectations, and then we raised it a little bit to be more challenging and see if we can live up to that by 22 or not. Some of the more specific examples of this cooperation, well, it took some years for industry and military to build up a trust between each other, and now I think we are quite good already in that, and we have started a joint working groups in different areas, for example, ICT, personnel equipment, technical equipment, weapon systems, where, well, if you take the industry people who are interested in some field, but most of them don't have any military background, so and the military is quite unique if you compare to the rest of the world, kinda. So it's beneficial or critical to get the insight into the military. And now we have come to that far that there is a joint working group where we have a military specialist actually saying that what are the needs of Estonian defense forces and defense forces in general, the products that the industry already has, how could you develop those, or which are the gaps? And we haven't really found a good answer from the world market that is there something that industry could come up with to help to fulfill those gaps. And of course it still takes time and for both sides, for military to identify those gaps and to come up with the clear rationale, what do we really want, and then the industry to reply that is it something they can do or they cannot do. Now the other kind of method or other thing we do for that is that for third year now, the Minister of Defense has a program where we have put aside some amount of money for the industry to come up with new good ideas. So we have a kind of competition where the industry can send up their business plan, so to say, that well, I would like to develop such a thing, and this could actually help in some area or to develop a product. And we have made it quite clear that, and the message to industry is that don't concentrate on something that you see Estonian defense force needs today. Because the defense force is too small for any whatever industry to just build up their business on the needs of that. What we're trying to do that we want to get the new ideas which could actually be or have a export potential, and we would like to support those ideas. We have a panel or a board to evaluate those ideas, which consist of several Minister of the Defense, military of course, Minister of Interior, police, Minister of Economics, also different agencies, for example, even the patent agency, to make sure that they will make sure that is this idea already somewhere, somebody has thought about it, or is it new? So by this program, we actually have brought several companies who have not doing a defense things, but if they have a great idea and they need some money to help to develop it, and we understand very well that the small enterprises, it's difficult to put aside development money for them, because they just don't make such kind of cash in their businesses, and we follow the European rules, so we only support them up to 45% if it's a small or medium enterprise, and they have to put their own, so we don't take all the responsibility for that. But in fact, now this year we started the third round, and we already have a results from the first 2 years ago, and the companies came to give us an overview, and there were 4 of them, and actually some of them are already out on industry or the big defense exhibitions with their products. And they are making already, well, they haven't made any deals yet, but there are a lot of interest from the potential customers. So this is something we can really see that from our actions, the companies have come up with something which actually has export potential. Yes, and as I said, this brings up actually quite an attention from the companies. And we have more requests than we have money. Maybe because we have little money for that. But now this is, and in a way, as we said, we want innovative thinking. So as it was said in the morning, that smart defense needs smart industry. So that's what we are trying to tell them. That and as Mr. State Secretary also said, that don't try to do something which already there. Because the big world producers will always make it cheaper, or they always have more research money and so on. And for a small nation, try to come up with something new, innovative, and that's what we are trying to do. That's in short what I...
All right, thank you. We will definitely return to the issues that both gentlemen raised during their presentations during the Q&A session. But we will continue with Ms. EGLE, who will speak from the perspective of the industry. So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. When you are in doubts, then it's usually you can choose 2 ways. You can trust only yourself, or you can still ask your friends, people you know, people who are competent in certain issues. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for us today to hear different stories, to hear some advice how to go forward and how really benefit from being a membership country in the NATO. Also, Mr. State Secretary, he said that 2 times you mentioned blossom. And I think that all of us, we have noticed that there is a spring, and the air is tasty already, And I think that this is also spring for defense industries, because we see that those migrating birds, those companies who have been testing their opportunities in foreign markets, in defense sectors, sending their products to South Africa, to Australia, Switzerland, they are also, from time to time, migrating back and looking what's going on here. So maybe we can develop our production, maybe we can hire some more people to work in our companies. And I think that if in the beginning of foundation of FSDI Latvia, companies who came together and also universities who came together, we were much more focused on NATO with an understanding or perception that NATO is somewhere outside, that it's somewhere there, and that we have to grasp those opportunities, that we have to learn how to network with the big multinationals, how to participate in NATO programs. And let's say honestly, we are devoting really a lot of time really focusing on that. But nowadays, of course, we understand that NATO is not somewhere there. Now NATO is here. And those tasks which as an industry we could fulfill here, they are very, very important. And following just media news, social media, that putting defense issues, defense topics on a top lines almost every day basically provokes me to think that it's not just a question of politicians. It's not just a question of diplomats. It's really questions which can be also discussed in industry. What we can do for defense, what we can do for security, and of course much more integrated approach, much more trustful dialogue should be established. And therefore, if we are looking and for industry perspective, what could we do now? I would say that we see, of course, certain sectors which could be really front runners in defense, and those has been mentioned already. These are ICT. This is electronics. We have robots. We have unmanned air vehicles. We have Navy ships. So Latvian industry is really ready to support needs of our armed forces, and understanding that NATO is really here to go with those products also and offer them to other NATO countries, which can really see that what Latvia can offer. And before coming here, some 24 hours ago, I posted also a question for my friends on internet, because I said that sometimes you ask friends what they think, and more than 140 people in 24 hours, they just replied my questions, because I asked what are those benefits from membership in NATO, and what's interesting that those people answered that 43% they still see that membership in NATO gives more opportunities for our security and defense sector. So 29% see it as collective security opportunity, and another 29% also see it as international reputation for Latvia to be a member country of NATO. And on my question if industry and science has also some benefits out of that, there was zero. And that's the challenge which FSDI Latvia has to follow. We have to really show that defense, it's not just expenditure line in a state budget, that it's basically investment in better working places and investment in innovation.
Thank you for reminding us that it's, again, largely about jobs as well. So it's not transferring your money abroad in exchange for complex military equipment, but it's also jobs at home. So thank you for your perspective. And the last panelist, Mr. Tālis, JUHNA, will present an academic perspective on cooperation between universities and the Ministry of Defense.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank for inviting me here at this distinctive forum. It's not so often that academics are presented in this kind of discussion, so I'm really thankful for that. Also, I have to say that I may be not able to speak on behalf of all academics. I'm all focusing on engineering since I'm representing technical university, so obviously we are mostly dealing with technologies. And therefore, my look at this cooperation is through the technological kind of prism. I would like to say about two things, and maybe first of all, more of a general how we understand NATO or military sector in general can cooperate with universities, with research institutes, and maybe then a little bit more specific what we as an engineering university have observed in these 10 years from this common cooperation. So in general, it's clear that science and military sector has been very strongly linked through history, and we know that it's not just what the military is contributing from the science and research, but it's vice versa, that research has also been contributing a lot from this sector. And I think some of the examples of technologies which we are using nowadays in civil lives have been already shown in previous section. GPS, I think it's a very obvious example which is actually coming from the military science. And in fact, there's been also, for some of the countries, I think Israel is a good example, where cooperation with military and entrepreneurship has been actually very fruitful for developing of the innovative economy in the country. So, but talking about the situation in Baltic states and in Latvia in general, I think I will not tell you a secret that the research has been underfunded for many years. And there's, if you look at the famous graph showing what is the contribution from GDP for the research and development in the countries, we are somewhere at the I think the third place, but from the bottom. So obviously this has been playing a significant role also, that maybe that there's the cooperation between the industry and the research has not been so pronounced so far. But I'd like to really look at from the bright side on future, and there are two reasons for that. The first is then, if you look at the military industry and technologies, then you will see that there's a huge change as you shift what technologies are being used. Some of the examples we have already heard, like robots. You have drones. You have cyber protection systems, and so on. So these are the technologies which are actually are now becoming more and more important for the warfare, especially when you talk about the so-called asymmetric war, which as I understand, I'm not a military person, but I understand for the small countries like Latvia, this is the way to go. So obviously these technologies could be very useful for the military sector. And what we observe in universities, that this, the time from the point when you have idea and the point when the technology is actually is in market is shortening. So meaning that there's more and more opportunities for the ideas which are generated by universities to be absorbed by the military sector. So there's kind of vector towards shortening this, let's say, the period of technologies being taken up by the market on one hand. On the other hand, what we see is that universities, especially technical universities and engineering universities, they are kind of pushed more and more towards innovation. You know that, for example, our university has three major pillars. It's research, education, and innovation. So what do we mean by innovation? By innovation, we mean that we have to find, work more closely with industry to provide technology transfer. That is actually happening. And also to generate more startups. I think MIT is a good example working in that direction, that universities actually are the place where many startups can be generated, and in our case, of course, startups, for example, working on the robots, on developing new type of materials, which can be very effectively taken up by the military industry as well. So I think just want to stress that these kind of vectors are, to my view, are converging in a sense that universities are more pushed towards cooperation with industry, and industry has more opportunities, military industry has more opportunities to take up the technology. So I think it's a good sign. What has happened so far? I'm myself been very actively involved in many research projects over the last 10 years. And I have to say that most of the research what we have been together with, or more related to the military research, is through the European funding. I think that Latvia has been very successful in applying for so-called framework projects. From these projects we have technologies like, for example, robots, which can be used also for the military purposes, or the submarine fish, which can be used for the spying and delivering different kind of products. So I think there's been a lot of developments using European funding specifically for taking the example of framework projects. Locally, of course, we didn't have any particular program dedicated to the cooperation between military research and universities. But I have to say what we have been doing, we have tried to really look for the opportunities, small niches, where we can really find the common interest. I think example of using the uniforms, or developing uniforms for the soldiers. We have also some cooperation in IT solutions for the training centers and so on. So there are some small things what we can do. And already are doing together with our Ministry of Defense. But how to change this? Of course, this is always comes back to the funding. But I think it's not just about funding per se. It's also about how do we really dedicate it. And I think that the right way to go is really try to specialize. By this I mean to develop a specific programs meeting the needs of the particular military sector. In case of Latvia, I think that border protection is a very sensitive area where you can really apply, for example, different kind of sensors and robots to make this protection more effective. So I think that even we have a low funding for research, still there are opportunities if we concentrate our forces to do small but very useful things for our security and safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. JUHNA. And now is the time when when all of you in the audience can get involved, ask questions, say comments. And I suppose that there's the first question, and then there will be the second.
Thank you very much. My name is Vlad Vernigora. I'm from Tallinn University of Technology from Estonia. So Estonian presence is there, and plus I think it's your university too. Yes. The question is, in my question, I'd like to summarize what you've just said. What you all. Sorry, Toms, if I will steal a little bit of bread from you, in terms of summarizing. A few years ago, I asked the then Secretary General of NATO, Rasmussen, a simple question. I think you have a lot of like-minded countries around the world for NATO. And are you thinking of enhancing cooperation with those countries, like say Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea? And he said, yes, yes, we are thinking, and but it didn't seem like NATO at that point 3 years ago had a big plan on how to enhance cooperation with its partners in Asia Pacific. Now they do. For example, Australia is now in the closest circle of NATO. It's among the enhanced partners of North Atlantic Alliance. My question to you is to you all. How would you think? Do you, as people who are involved in defense and defense industry or policy making in defense, do you think you are utilizing an opportunity, numerous opportunities in those prospective and existing partners, or with those partners who are formally under this scheme of a NATO global partnership? Do you talk to them often? Because this is where your benefits are lying. You have a lot of things to offer to those people in Japan, for example, South Korea, in Australia. How often do you gather those ambassadors from those countries? You know, do you meet them? And because it seems like you are locked in with this 28, and you run around, and sometimes it's just about catching 22. But there are so many opportunities in the countries who would like to be partners, not only on the business level, but on the global security level, because this international system, which is post 1945, it is in ruins, and we are now building a completely new system. And NATO is presumably is likely to probably, it will need to be involved as a unit in there, and you have partners around the world. So do you talk to them? And if you do, you know, do you see any benefits? Thank you.
So who would like to be the first to respond?
Well, I think that's more of a policy question than anything else. So I would say, yes, of course, we talk to them. But I think we should not exaggerate the importance at this current point in time of these relationships. They are important, of course. We've been together in Afghanistan. Australians were one of the top force providers in Afghanistan. That was actually how they were sitting at the NATO table, making some influence on the NATO decision-making on operation in Afghanistan. But I think one thing is clear, that NATO is not yet a global alliance. It's still an Atlantic alliance. And the reason why countries want to talk to NATO is because NATO is credible as an alliance. So I think first point I would say is, for anybody be interested in NATO, NATO has to be credible. And I would say from time to time, especially the European arm of NATO had some issues with that. So to have a good dialogue, we have to sort our things properly. And that includes also defense spending, defense capabilities, research and development, et cetera, in Europe. Second point is, there are converging interests. The converging interests are stability in some particular regions. These converging interests are Central Asia, I think. And I think at least some larger NATO allies have more converging interests with the Asia-Pacific powers, given the sort of also certain level of rising tensions in the region. So there are some interaction. To be successful, it has to be built on the credibility of NATO, where we have things to do. For the three Baltics, well, we have something, But I think, frankly speaking, we are not the key partner there. There are some relationships, but we are neither the key partners nor the key players in these sort of converging interest areas. So I think it's limited. As for the business, I think these countries are very much protecting their defense markets, apart from the things that are really top-level technology things that they want to buy and procure from those who produce them. And well, as we heard from the panel, we're not yet there to produce anything of a top-notch technology to have Australia or Japan or South Korea interested. So I hope we will in 10 or 15 years, but not now.
If I may say, then that's very interesting. But our first memorandum of understanding, which FSDI Latvia has signed, has been with South Korea, and our partnering organization there. Of course, it's a very advanced market. It's very strong. It's really protective market with strong traditions, and that's one of the reasons why we need such kind of partnership with similar organization there. And our members, of course, are participating in exhibitions when it's appropriate and when it's possible in growing markets, Asia. Now we are also looking for some exhibitions in Brazil. So we are thinking what's interesting, where we can be part. But what we also would like to receive much more support from our Ministry of Economy, so that they see defense as really as industry and a sector, because we are not visible on their policy papers, and that's a job for future.
All right, thank you. Then let's proceed to the next question. Mr. Kristovskis, please.
Okay, thank you for a very good explanation of current situation related to business in Latvia defense industry, and not only in Latvia, in Estonia too. And it seems that here on our audience you have several players from different institutions, and my question is related to coordination of information which all players or each player has. Why such a question? Because it seems to me that everybody knows that we have some success. Everybody knows that in private sectors there are some successful companies. They already somewhere in NATO. Everybody knows some stories that Ministry of Defense would like to support somebody. Scientists knows that they innovative technologies might be applied somewhere. Some institution which coordinates business also knows that we have some abilities and some innovative technologies. But for business always is question whether these institutions are enough well coordinated and thus really helping to our business, mostly SMS, to achieve something. Whether some small company can use Ministry of Defense as a pipeline to get in the market, to find some approach, because this is really very vast world. It's everything. It covers everything, and how to find the right door to knock. If, for example, some small company has no availability of information, they don't have enough resource to make feasibility studies and so on. That's why, from my point of view, one of the weak side at that time when I was Minister of Defense and I tried coordinate really people from Academy of Science, tried involve business people, also to establish some small unity in ministry, to somehow put together all efforts to have a clear vision of where to go, whether we can specialize it, really something Ministry of Economy always is against, because this is a market economy, and it is. But it seems to me that without support of state, we are less effective, especially because we are small states, I mean also Baltic states. We are less effective. That's why, from my point of view, coordination from state side, from science, from ministries, and from business organizations like Ms. EGLE represents, should be as effective as possible to help really for new companies, for startups, to get in the market. And also, still last sentence, as I mentioned, it seems to me that sometimes we speak about some successful companies, but whether you understand how they became successful, whether this is the support of state or whether this is really their own achievement. They did their best and they get in the market, and without any support. But afterwards, of course, a lot of people talk about this, even on president level. We are happy, we have some successful company, but how to get more, how to develop opportunities for more success stories. This is a question of trust from business to state and from state to business. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to respond
Well, if
first?
I may, well, I would say that coordination is always good, but in the market, coordination without money is just gesticulation. There's no purpose, no outcome of it. So I would say that it is all worth the effort, and there's always room for improvement in the coordination between different entities. But you have to have money to actually buy things, to allow companies to get into the supply chains, and et cetera, et cetera. This is a highly competitive market. We've said it a number of times. There is serious level of protection of this market in a number of places. So if we want to help somebody with a product, it doesn't help just say, well, we know the door where to knock on. We have to say, well, our government is ready to spend X amount, so can we work together to invest there, and that might work. That's the way it should be, and how we can get our small, medium enterprises in these supply chains, how they can be very effective. And of course, if somebody comes up with totally innovative product and then has a good applicability of that product towards the defense, of course, then there might be a better prospect without actually government already spending some money. But as Estonian example, I think is a very good one. You have to also invest in the research and development. And I have, sorry to say, I'm from defense, but 1% of GDP keeps us barely, on the survival level. There's no money for research and development. Once we'll be at 2%, well, we might have a discussion. We might talk about the programs like Estonia has, with looking for the new innovative ideas. I don't know, cyber missile, for instance, or something like that. Why not? But the money, well, there was one famous U.S. Secretary of Defense who referred, money talks. Otherwise, it's not really to the point.
Mm-hmm. Mr. KUTT?
Yeah, as I said before, that's pretty much exactly what we are trying to achieve with our defense industry policy. And we have had it for two years now, and we realized that we need to revise it. But exactly as it was said here, that the money is the important part, otherwise it is just talk. And we had very hard discussion within our MOD that there is always need for this money we have put aside for this research and development, but you could buy uniforms, you could buy weapons, you could buy whatever for the same money. So it was very tough discussion that should we put amount of money for that. And as I said, it seems it's working, although it's quite early yet to come to any hard conclusions, but at least that the first impression seems that even the small amount of money is a beginning of something.
Ms. EGLE?
Yes, I would say so that nothing grows in a comfort zone, I think. And when you're out of comfort zone, and then you start to move. And from industry perspective, I would say the first thing is really to see defense and to see NATO as a customer. And it takes time and investment from companies to really focus on the needs and capabilities which should be developed for this certain customer. And we have been encouraged by our participation in an IAG study group for cybersecurity, that there are opportunities also for SMEs to participate and give their ideas. And of course, we lack capacity to participate in a study. All study groups we probably would like to, because it asks also investment from companies. But I see that first of all we have to see that NATO, that our Ministry of Defense, that's a customer, because then we start to work, and then we are getting out from our comfort zone. And talking about cooperation and coordination of things, I could say just for two levels. If we talk about national level, then we are having action plans together with Ministry of Defense. We have action plan with Ministry of Interior Affairs, so we know quite strictly what we have to do this year. So it's not just framework agreement, let's live friendly. And I'm also very glad that all my Baltic colleagues are here participating in this conference, and we are really coordinating a lot what we are doing. And yes, right after this conference, I'm going to my Lithuanian colleagues, and we will talk with NSPA, with NCIA, and just do our work further.
Well, as on university behalf, I would say that, of course, as university, we have a lot of networking. We try to find the partners both in Baltic countries, and trying also to talk to the ministries. I think sometimes we spend a lot of time for looking for the partners, but then it's end up with what is the demand? Do we have actually demand from that industry? And then I think the story ends with that. So what we can do, what we try to do is, as I said, of course we try to facilitate the university students and the researchers to start their companies. We have, for example, we have incubators, which allows students to start their small companies, and we can help them in different ways how to do this. But again, the question is there will be demand for the products they are developing? And there are many products actually sitting in a shelf. Mm-hmm. So they just have to grab them.
All right, thank you. There's a question. Ms. Rubas, please.
Thank you very much. It's been a very illuminating panel. I've spent the last half year working a lot or learning a lot about startup environments. And I was talking to several investors and asked, so after Silicon Valley and maybe New York City, what are the hottest places for startups in Europe? And the first reply was Berlin. And then sort of a breath was taken and said, well, London, and then actually the Nordic area. I said, specifically Estonia or Stockholm or where is it? No, it's actually the totality of the Nordics. And if I look especially to both members from or representatives of the Defense Ministry, and it's unfortunate we don't have the very strong Lithuanian defense representative here somewhere, except for the defense industry itself. On this. Do you actually look at coordinating, let's say, focus of research, or looking at the gaps that were identified, for example, in the previous panel, or soft spots, or whatever the hell they were called, and saying we should be together with other partners in the Nordic defense system, let's call it that, from the Nordic countries, not NORAD, I'm not talking about NORAD, but more all that, looking at we should actually be focusing our knowledge and our capabilities, and I look also actually to academia in the same thing, because on one hand, you know, it's all about building an industry, building, yes, it's about jobs, and furthering knowledge much faster, you know, on one hand. Second question, so question is, how much do you actually cooperate? I know that Balts are absolutely abysmal at cooperation, and Scandinavia isn't much better. So, but maybe there's maybe you're finding a way. Second question to Ms. Egle, which industries do you actually represent? How many members do you have? And how do you ensure transparency, or let's say the lack of corruption in the procurement processes and deals that you make with ministries? Because my trust in Latvian companies is rather low in this area.
So, now's the time for tough questions, right?
Well, if I once again may start. So now I'm sitting on this side. I would say first on the coordination. I think the Baltic states, if we speak about the military cooperation, if you look at all the rest that we do together, military is by far the best. By far the best. We have joint units, joint projects, Baltic Defense College, air surveillance, and etc., etc. So I have to admit that amongst this very good cooperation, defense procurement is probably not the one where we are very proud of the results. And there are many different reasons. One of the most preeminent is being different levels of funding. When we come to talk about, well, there is a need for a new mechanized platform for defense, well, Latvia can look at one sort of platform, Estonia can look at a totally different sort of platform. Well, that's the reality of the things as they are. And of course, the other is the political cycle. Big procurement products decisions are made within given political cycle. It's a big decision, a lot of competing interests, and these might not coincide, so it's difficult. But there is an upside. We don't have that much of vested interest in the existing industry, where I would say for the Nordics to cooperate, they have to merge the industry first and foremost, otherwise they would not be able to do the cooperation at all. So I would not say that in the defense, Nordics are good, Baltics are not as good. No. But we would be interested, of course, to enlarge this sort of cooperation between Nordics and Baltics, and there is the forum of Nordic-Baltic 8, but because of a number of reasons, there are some reluctance to merge too much. And of course, there are practical reasons for that. Once again, competitiveness, protection of markets. But second, it's also varied levels of participation in the institutions. You have Nordics who are part of NATO, but are not part of EU, and vice versa. So there are limits. But I think I would also pick on this SME issue. I think, and I believe there, if I would say to our industry, where the area we have to really look for the good new innovative products, that's the internet-based sort of technology. If we look at a sort of hybrid warfare, might have been referred to a number of times, there are a lot of things that are sort of software-based for big data analysis. Well, there are big companies doing that, but how do you then apply it to the given local circumstances? For instance, how do you look at the social media and understand what's going on? So you have to have both the linguistic capability as well as the big data analysis capability, ability to establish patterns, and etc. I think there's an opportunity. Not much of a product available. Some, I think, are very much hidden. Possibility. Cyber missile, well, I was only half joking. There's a whole area that's up for grabs in my view. And we here in the three Baltics are very well placed because although of course our software production capability is stretched already, there's some successes, but because of that. But in my view, because of what are our everyday realities, we can be at the forefront. And I can say now as a EU chairmanship, I have to work with a lot of other European countries. I think we're about around top 6 or 7 in Europe on, I mean 3 Baltics, in a cybersecurity, cyber defense area. So why don't translate into the products that might have not only the technological advantage, but also the sort of flavor of the successful area they come from. And there they don't distinguish that much in that area of, Nordics and the Baltics. Sometimes in the Baltics we've been better than our Nordic partners. So there are areas which we have to actually push for, and there for small, medium enterprises, startups, I think an excellent area to work on.
Yeah, my question is easy to answer because basically today's official opening of our catalog. So here you can find all the members of FSDI Latvia, and we are also, that's going to be for the next week news, but we're also glad that the SAB group is also part of the federation, so it shows something about the standards we are following. And the core of the FSDI is of course producers of services and producers of the products, and not wholesalers, let's say so. So we are really in the industry-based organization. And regarding transparency issues, yes, we're also we know this disease in Latvia, and we are sick of this. And we are working together with Transparency International right now on what kind of procedures we could really implement, especially in a closed systems, which those sectors are, and really to give opportunity producers to go themselves and not to be represented by some kind of middleman in a row. So you're all very welcome, because informal opening was last week when we had EU Armament Directors informal meeting here. That's why our opening was also informal. But today it's formal, so you're all very welcome to take this booklet with you.
Mm-hmm. Mr. KUTT? I just wanted to add a few words from joint procurement. So yes, absolutely right. It's very difficult to achieve a joint procurement. That not in Baltic states or Nordic states, but if you look at the NATO-wide, the Smart Defense Initiative came out some years ago, but there were not so many of tangible examples. But I'm still happy. We have managed to do few with the Baltic states and some with the Nordics, and actually there are some in the process today. So hopefully in future we hear for some other good smart procurements.
Okay.
May I react on that?
Sure.
Because it's touching upon more on entrepreneurship in general, environment of entrepreneurship in general. Well, you know that which is the country with the highest number of SMEs per 1,000 inhabitants in the world? It's actually Egypt. So it's not United States, it's Egypt. But the question is, what is the productivity of the product they are selling? So it's not just about the number of SMEs, about the productivity and type of products, and how to leverage, how to encourage this. What we experience is that what we are lacking in the country is so-called, smart money, the money which would be available for the startups. And I'll give you an example. I mentioned that we have just last year started so-called green incubator between 2 universities. And what we see in the first 2 months, we have more than 100 proposals, very good ideas. And I think within few years there will be maybe we count something like 14, 20 new startups, very high-tech startups starting from university. So it's really about the availability of the funding for these innovative companies. If we have this, I think this will boost, or we'll have more companies which will also work mostly, or hopefully also for the military sector.
Thank you. Yes, the question over there.
I think I'm the Taipei mission of the representative for the Taipei from Taiwan. We do have a lot of things. Probably you see the ISO 3 computer in here. 2 of them come from Taiwan. I want to say this. I've been talked to a lot of the complaint here. For instance, like the iPhone, the assembly complaint, Foxconn, they had 1 million employer. And one of the Latvian complaint they're doing for the blue stone some screen, something like that. I would to make some of the middleman for matchmaker for both of them to contact each other for the future. Also for the Estonia synchronized complaint, and also right now Skippy is already Microsoft. But anyway, for synchronized, we already make some of the match to maker to both of them to in Taiwan and some other complaint. I want to say some people they mention about Australia, Korea, or Japan in South Asia countries, but in Taiwan we have some of the capability to doing a lot of things. Here is your office in here. In here we try to doing the matchmaker or the middleman or some other things to help the local people, industrial and the Taipei to come to Taiwan or doing some of the help. If anyone interested about that things or industrial, especially industrial people, you want to make some of things, we try to do help.
Thank you. And that was a comment, I suppose. All right. Let's take another question.
It's not going to be a question, it's a comment. I just want to talk about perspective for a minute, because we've talked industry, we've talked NATO, we've talked smart defense. I made this comment in Riga, actually, 2.5 years ago at the ACT conference. NATO spends, costs nations less than 0.5% of their defense budget. The reason this is vital for industry is that means your customer is your nation, not NATO. And that takes you a stage further. The big projects are going to come in smart defense, perhaps not yet, but they are actually slowly building, and smart defense projects are going to be cooperative projects between 3, 4, and 5 nations. And I think we will see the Baltics coming through in terms of cooperative defense projects. But for the industry, not just of Latvia, for all the Baltics, wherever, understand that NATO is an extremely small and extremely difficult market. You're much better starting at home and trying to follow smart defense where your nation is leading.
Other questions or comments?
This was good.
Well, in that case, it looks like this panel is coming to an end. I think that we had 4 very good and informative presentations, and I think that at least the 3 Latvian panelists, in a way, look at the coming years as a spring which may eventually turn into a warm and nice summer, perhaps not Baltic summer. And that there's hope that Latvian security and defense industries will be reaping these benefits of NATO membership to a much greater extent, and that we will also have a much healthier and stronger defense sector, although the reasons for that are, of course, partly most regrettable. So thank you, and thank you for coming and asking questions. And now we can proceed to the I think our panelists will need a hand.
Yeah.